Welcome everybody. Just to clarify, there were two people who were listed as doing this workshop. That was actually a favor that was done for me. My mother's been ill, and so I wasn't sure I was going to make it this morning. Somebody was kind enough, Tina Jansen was kind enough to offer to step in for me, but I will be doing the entire presentation, so it won't be shared by me and a lawyer. What I'd like to do is start with a few observations and personal pieces of information. I don't know how many of you read an article that was in the Times about 10 days ago about somebody who had been stricken with COVID, and he had no advanced care planning. He had not taken the time to share what his wishes would be if something sudden and tragic happened, and decisions had to be made about the end of his life. And his wife and his teenage daughter were left wondering what they would do when they found out that he was in the hospital and had been intubated. This is happening, unfortunately, more and more to people around the country right now in the midst of this pandemic, but it's not something new at all. The number of people in this country who take the time in advance to think about what they'd like and to designate somebody to be their voice when they can't speak for themselves, which is really what an advance directive is not as high as we would hope it would be. The other piece of information that I'd like to share from the get-go is that it's very rare for people in their 20s and 30s to actually take the time to put these tools together. And I remember telling a number of my friends that I had done this when I was in my 20s, and they're being surprised. And for those who fall into my age cohort, I was busy watching friends get sick and die from AIDS. And I was also in a relationship that my own family was not really ready to accept at the time. And I knew that if something happened to me, my parents would be the people who legally would be making my decisions unless I took the time to put together a lot of documents. So in the late 1980s, I, along with Judy, put together documents that traveled in my backpack with me wherever I was, in case, God forbid, something happened. And I carried not only my documents, but her documents. And when we traveled by car, we always had an extra set in the trunk. It seemed to be the best way to make sure that we were protected. We were, as the title of this says, hoping for the best, but we were planning for the worst. And hoping against hope that we would never need to use these documents. And that really is one way to think about them. These are documents, these are types of planning that we would hope would never need to be called on. But in case they do, we need to be thinking about what types of questions we need to be asking ourselves, who we need to share our desires with, and what types of paperwork, literally papers, need to be filled out and signed and stored in certain places so that they can actually be operative when needed. So in New York State, there is the Family Healthcare Decision Act, which determines for us, in the absence of our having articulated for ourselves what we would want, who would be called on to make decisions for us. For adults, if there is somebody who is literally designated as your legal guardian, that is the person who would make the decision for you, and that's who children have making their decisions. If someone is married or has a domestic partner, that person is the person who makes decisions for you. So one of the things that I often say to my students when talking with them about marriage and domestic partnership is that if you're living with somebody for decades and there's no legal recognized relationship, you have less ability to say something about what is done to that person than somebody who's married 1 minute. The legality of domestic partnership and marriage changes the calculus of who makes decisions for you when you're unable to make decisions. In the absence of a spouse, an adult child would be the person who would make a decision for an adult if they are of an age where they have adult children. Many people think that their adult children as a collective will be able to make a decision, but only one person can be designated as the mouthpiece for an individual. If a family is one in which people consult comfortably with each other and will come to some sort of consensus, ultimately only one of those people will be able to speak for the person who's unable to speak for themselves. We return to that. Any advance directive only comes into play when you are unable to speak for yourself. As long as you are competent and you have a voice or some way to communicate, you will be the person who's making your own healthcare decisions. It's when you cannot do that for yourself that you're making sure that someone else is empowered to do that, and that it's a person that you would like to be able to do that. An adult child of any age who has a parent who is still alive would have that person, their parent would be the person who's turned to, hence my decision to make these documents, legal documents for me. In the absence of parents, a brother or sister, a sibling of the person who needs to have a voice would be the person who would be turned to. And then there would be a close friend if someone is listed, if somebody is known. One of the important things to recognize is that while these are the people who, according to the law, would be turned to, we all have the ability to choose anyone we want to be our healthcare proxy. And ideally, that's somebody who you've spoken to at length about what you'd like to have happen and who has agreed to take on this role if and when it's necessary. I had a friend many years ago who I was speaking with about healthcare proxies. And she said she knew that her husband loved her dearly, and she knew that she and her husband had totally different ideas about life support, and that she could never ask him to be in a position to decide to take her off life support. And she knew that all she would want would be to be taken off life support if she reached a certain stage. And together they agreed that she was going to ask one of her friends who she had had these conversations with, who understood what her beliefs were and was going to be able, or felt she'd be able to give that directive, God forbid, if someday it was necessary. Our ability to choose and choose wisely who will be making those decisions for us is one of the major parts of advanced care planning. 1 second. The recommendation by people who work in the area of advanced care planning is that we revisit, check in with ourselves first, but also revisit any documentation we have when we are confronted with what they call the 5 Ds. They say every decade we should be revisiting our advance directives and our wills and all of the things that have to do with end of life and death that we may have prepared, because our life experiences, as well as our new perspectives, as well as what may have come up in healthcare provision, all are being changed, as well as perhaps what type of health insurance we have. And therefore, checking it as we enter a new decade will keep us on our toes and make sure that we take care of revisions if we need one. The death of a loved one, family or otherwise, often puts into perspective decisions that we've made before and makes us question whether or not the ways that we understood ourselves, what we're looking for in our lives, as well as what we're looking for in our deaths, sheds new light on it. And so whenever we realize that we've lost someone that we're close to, it's worth taking a few breaths and then thinking about whether or not what we've shared about what we'd want about our own end of life still is speaking for us in the way that we'd want it to. Divorce, any change in personal status should be also a moment to take stock again. Different types of diagnoses are going to draw us up short and make us realize that there may be new things that we need to take into account, new things that we want to articulate. And as we see ourselves decline in different ways, or we watch people around us decline, we will have new questions. We will have new things that we're considering, and there can be an important impetus for us to look at our paperwork again. Oops. Advanced care planning involves a number of different things. Advanced care planning is the overall process that enables us as individuals to make plans about future healthcare. These can begin with conversations. They can begin with personal reflection. They can begin, from my perspective, we start our advanced care planning the first time that we are confronted with something that makes us go, oh, I would never want fill in the blank. That can start when we're kids. I remember when I was about 9 years old, one of my great uncles had a very severe stroke. And I remember walking in and being frightened because he was unable to speak to me. He was unable to move his body. And I remember our walking out of the room and my mother saying to my father, I never want to be in that state. And at 9, taking that in as there are things that we can share with people about what we want and what we don't want. I didn't know whether it was actually possible that things could be done, but the idea that there are ways that people would choose not to live come in and inform our thinking consciously and unconsciously, and the possibility of reviewing some of those and thinking about whether or not they still speak to us can be really powerful. Advanced directives are these legal documents where we can take action and specifically indicate things that we would want or not want. And as I said before, they only come into play when we are no longer able to speak for ourselves because of illness or incapacity. A healthcare proxy is the person that you choose to speak for you. There are legal documents in New York State that allow us to designate any other adult person who we would like to be the person who will make those decisions for us. The healthcare proxy can be very, very detailed in terms of specific things that you would like to have the proxy consider. And the healthcare proxy can either follow your directions specifically or move from them if they feel that it's important. The living will is a written advance directive listing the treatments that you would like or not like, and different circumstances that you would like to be living in so that they can help you and the people who are taking care of you know more about what you would like. And a DNR is very specific. It's whether or not CPR will be applied if you go into, if your heart stops beating. There are specific things about all of these that I would encourage any of you who are interested in looking into preparing some sort of advanced directive or updating yours to discuss more fully, both with your healthcare providers as well as with some lawyers. What matters is an offshoot of a program that's called Respecting Choices, which was created by a group of physicians and healthcare providers and insurers, actually, out in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where they did an experiment to see what it would be like as people entered hospitals for just routine care and or more emergent care. What would happen if they began a conversation with them about what they would want at the end of their lives? What sort of advanced care planning they would be willing to engage in, and what it would do for them and their families if all of that was in place. And over the course of a couple of years in La Crosse, 98% of people in the town of La Crosse ended up having advanced care planning discussions and having advanced directives. They followed that up with discussions with families and family members of those who had filled out these advanced directives. And what they found was that families were far more comfortable talking casually with each other about changes that took place in their physical health, changes that were taking place in the country in general, and also felt relieved that they knew what types of decisions they might be making for somebody in advance, and when they felt uncomfortable to be able to have follow-up conversations. And as their circumstances changed and they were concerned that they wanted to make some changes to the advanced directives that they've written, that they knew that they could already have these conversations with family or friends and that it wouldn't be shocking or put them off in any way. Here in New York, the Jewish community has created its own program, which is called What Matters, and it's guided by Jewish values. The mission is a community that embraces advanced care planning as a natural part of life, in which end-of-life decisions are known, respected, and honored. And the vision of this, which is housed at the JCC, but is now being done in many communities, including our own, is that New Yorkers will be engaged in compassionate, value-driven conversations about advanced care planning so that they can live with the comfort of knowing that their choices will be honored by loved ones and their healthcare professionals. The guiding principle behind What Matters is that our ability to make decisions about how we want to die or the ways, what we would like to have done at the end of our lives is predicated on what we understand about what makes living good living. What makes our lives feel full and rich and meaningful today, and how we can hold on to as many of those things as possible as we move forward. And what would constitute a good day for us when we are perhaps not able to do everything that we would want to, but could still find meaning or purpose or joy, gratitude in our daily lives. When we know that we might not be able to do everything that we would want. What Matters is designed so that individuals can meet one-on-one with somebody who is a trained facilitator to work through a protocol. So it's not just a free-flowing conversation, but it's a conversation where there are prompts that will catalyze conversation so that in the end, the person who has sought out this conversation will have greater clarity about what types of things they might want, as well as a greater understanding of who the appropriate person will be for them to choose as a proxy. Because the selection of the proxy can be really important, as the illustration that I gave about my friend shows. It's not necessarily the person who would be the legal person who would be designated according to the list that I put up before, but it's the person who knows you well. It's the person who you've shared not only your wishes, but some of the whys and wherefores of those wishes with, so that if it's not exactly the circumstance that you conjured up in your own mind of what it would look like, would be able to extrapolate from the information you've shared with them about what the best choice would be in that moment. Oftentimes it's difficult to choose among people. So I know that often choosing among children can be a difficult decision and requires a lot of finesse and prior discussion with somebody, probably often somebody who's neutral, who can help you think through how you'll tell the person who might think, of course, they're going to be the person you choose, and why you haven't chosen them. One of the ways that this is facilitated through What Matters is there can be multiple conversations with Facilitator, and one of those could be with you and somebody who you would like to designate as your proxy, or somebody who you might feel assumes that they will be your proxy, to have a facilitated conversation to explain why you're leaning towards someone else. At CBST, we now have, I think it's 4 or 5 of us who are trained facilitators in What Matters. And we are hoping that in the next few weeks, month or so, we will be starting to offer the possibility of individuals being able to start working on their advanced care plans, and to have a chance to do that within CBST as one of the safe spaces that we all share. So what I'd like to do is open this up for questions now and some conversation. I don't know, Jason, is Jason available?
I can monitor participants if you want people to raise their hand electronically.
Okay.
Does everyone know how to raise their hand electronically? Go to the participants list and you can raise your hand at the bottom. And I can unmute you. Can I just ask one thing, Nancy?
Please.
In addition to having facilitators available for individual conversations, we're hoping in October to have a group conversation, which is also facilitated, but not as intimate, but will provide a forum to ask more questions and for people to share a little more intimately about what their issues are. But obviously, it won't be as individually focused as an individual session would be. And you could certainly go on to having an individual session. We do have some people. Laurie Krotman has a question.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. My question is, how frequently do we have to update this information? As you're talking, I pulled out my files that says wills and I have all the documents you say, but they're old. They're like 15 years old at least.
Right. So in one of the earlier slides, there's a recommendation that if at these different junctures, so basically every decade at least, we should review our documents, because our own understandings of what we might want, as well as who's available to name in different ways, might change. And so in order to be as up to date as possible, and to be sure that, God forbid, something happens suddenly, you're not left with people who you don't want making decisions for you or inheriting from you. I mean, within a decade, as I think about my family, between deaths and births, we've got a number of people who might be on different documents that either are no longer among us or who now would be among the people who might inherit. And so we need to be taking a look at these.
And if everything is okay and everyone's still alive and everything, all the people are there, still around, and there are no changes, then a 15-year-old healthcare proxy or living will or whatever are still valid. If
Absolutely. Yep, they're binding until you choose to redo them.
Thank you.
It was interesting. Part of the training to become a facilitator for What Matters is they ask how many people have healthcare proxies and living wills, advanced directives of any kind. And when I raised my hand, they then asked us how long the one that we have has been operative and whether we still think it is. And I had the same response as you. Yes, absolutely. The person I have named is the person I would want named, and nothing specific on those documents as opposed to a will. Yeah, it really changed it all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Shayna has a question.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Too. Thank you. So I have a question. I have moved to Florida, and is there a group of What Matters in existence there? And is it important to revisit everything when you change states and?
Right. So I am not aware of the group in New York is calling itself What Matters. The national organization is known as Respecting Choices.
Okay.
So that's what I'd suggest you take a look for down there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Michael Levine.
Hi, Rabbi. I wanted to thank you for that fascinating introduction. We've heard it all before. It's really good to hear you summarize it so well. My question to you is something I think you may not have covered, and I don't know if I've heard it before. Who should have copies of all the documents that you have talked about? And the number of documents that we really need to have at end of life is so important. Who should be the ones that get the copies of it? The obvious answer would be our attorneys, who we hope will still be around when they are needed to help us. But who else should have copies of it, and how often should we make sure that they still have up-to-date copies?
Okay, so your proxy should have copies. You should have something in your wallet that indicates who should be contacted in case of emergency. Mm-hmm. And that person should be the person who can be making healthcare decisions for you. If possible, you should have, What Matters has a wallet card that actually gives that specific information. You should have, if possible, somewhere on your door. So I know that I've got something that says there's a pet in my house. Make sure in case of fire, you get my pet. Somewhere right near that, you should have a copy of your documents, something that has a big thing saying important healthcare documents, so that the EMTs will know that it's there, so that somebody doesn't have to be with you or near you to be saying, 1 minute, let me get the papers that are going to be important. Ideally, if you've got some sort of keychain or something that has to have some sort of like jump drive that has your medical information on it so that they could use it when they get you to the hospital would be ideal. To make sure your lawyer has it, to make sure your doctors have it. To have somebody who might be your backup person in case they can't get to your first person who you have down as your healthcare proxy.
Would you recommend that any of the documents be, and I know they are securely kept in the rabbi's office, but would it make any sense to have any of these on file at CBST under lock and key?
That would be something that I don't know, quite honestly. That would be, I would think we'd have to consult some lawyers about that. And I'm not sure that the advanced directives would be of particular value for the synagogue to have in its possession, but I don't know. That would be something that we can check. There are other synagogues in New York who have this program up and running already, so it would be interesting to see how they're storing the information, or whether it's really they're providing a service and then the storing takes place.
Good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank
Lori Spiegel.
Hi, Nancy, thank you so much. This has been really informative. The thing that I like the most about what you said is talking about keeping your contact information on you at all times, because God knows, you could be walking down the street, you could get hit by a car, you won't be home. You can end up having a heart attack, you won't be home. You could have a stroke, you won't be home. And having this information with you at all times is certainly valuable for any kinds of healthcare providers, let alone your friends, family, etc., so that people know what to do. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. No other questions on the participant list. I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to ask anything. Anything you want to add, Nancy? Oh, here we have some people.
I see that Peter
Mar-
Klein on the chat.
And Marcia.
Okay.
Raise your hand with the.
Oh, yeah.
These facilitators that we'll be able to work with, after doing that work with them, will we come away with kind of a clear and some sort of document that we can use to create the, or update our living wills and advanced directives? Is that
Yes.
the
You will actually walk away with all of the information as well as forms that you would need to fill out in order to have a designated healthcare proxy and an advanced directive, which would not be in a form where you would be able to take them with you or have the information available to fill them out, and then to bring them so that they could be countersigned and notarized and stuff.
and
Right
just
now, because of the pandemic, what's needed in order to have a valid proxy has been altered some, so that it's easier, basically, because people can't be in the same space with the people who would be their witnesses. There's a special dispensation that's been made, which the person who would be facilitating this conversation would make sure
And just to clarify further too, because over time, I think I have many iterations of these documents, but I do have the most recent, of course. However, that is also, it's updating. Are they ever combined, the healthcare proxy and the advanced directive, in one legal document? Because I have a sense that that might be the case, but I'm not sure. Are they absolutely separate legal documents?
So there are proxies that will include the possibility of indicating specifics about what you want and don't want. And I don't have with me right at the moment the stuff specific to
New York State,
what?
the New York State
New
document.
York State document.
Yep.
Yeah. So I have an older one, but the two can be combined as far as I know, as long as they're signed.
Thank you.
Peter Klein has a question on the chat. He asks, is it possible that I will outlive my healthcare proxy can I provide an institution with the same information as well as funeral directives, etc.?
So the recommendation is that if or when somebody outlives their designated proxy, that they should designate a new proxy. Because you don't want to, by not having somebody designated, you are going to be going back to this list as the one that the state has to follow in terms of who they contact to be making decisions for you. And if by any chance the person who would be the one person that the state would go down this checklist and find the next person on the list is somebody that you would not want making your decisions, you're making sure that you do have some specific person designated becomes really important.
Okay, David has a question.
Hi, thank you very much for a wonderful session. I'm a pediatrician, and I sometimes have to have these conversations with parents. I wonder though, something I wonder about, and I wonder what your experience is talking to families, do you have a sense people really understand what they're getting into when you talk about things like feeding tubes or being on a respirator and things like that? What's your impression about how much individuals understand about what they're signing off to if they decide to pursue care, and what steps are taken to help them get a better understanding?
Okay, so one of the things that we make clear as facilitators is that we can have a conversation with them about what their values are and what their wishes are, and part of the process is to help them understand what they know or think they know and what they have questions about so that they can go beyond the facilitator to get their questions answered. And so we make no pretensions about being healthcare providers or knowledgeable about all of the ins and outs of the different options that exist. And we strongly encourage people to go back to their healthcare providers or other people that they depend on for information related to healthcare, and do homework before they finalize anything that they would be putting in writing. We don't want people to have misconceptions about what's going on. We've been seeing a lot of this with COVID, where people don't understand what the odds actually are when somebody's put on a respirator. And so we want to make sure that people have good, solid information.
Thank you.
What we're going to do through the protocol is help them, as I demonstrated at the beginning, think about what things they've seen in their own lives that have informed their sense of what they would and wouldn't want, as well as to be able to think about what they value about daily living that they'd like to try to maintain as much as possible, if at all possible.
Do you think it would be helpful if there were videos of various people at different stages with different problems that people could view, just to get a sense of what 5 minutes of life is like for this person or that person?
It's an interesting idea. I don't know. It would be something for the Judy Ribnick and the others who are involved in this to think about. It might be interesting for us to put together some sort of library or bibliography so that people could go and do their own studying and research, and then perhaps to make sure that they continue their exploration with not just the facilitators, but people who are the experts on these things.
Just a quick reminder, this session will end at 12:05.
Thank you. Edith Golub had a question. If your birth certificate is necessary at burial, and I guess when you die.
Do we have time?
What?
Edith Golub.
Is birth certificate used at burial?
Is your birth,
A birth certificate needed at time of
As
burial.
far as I know, you only need your death certificate. They have to have a confirmed death, but
I'm talking about
the lawyer
a
who
birth certificate, because my birth certificate is spelled with an I and it really ends with a Y.
Huh.
The spelling is wrong.
Right.
It's like the wrong.
Does that affect anything at burial?
And we have to change it.
I wish I
On the
knew
tombstone.
something about that, but are there lawyers among us who know the answer to that question?
Maybe it was the date.
I'm not going to worry then. I'm going to be 100 in 2 weeks.
Good for you.
So they're going to have to bury me one way or another. They have no choice.
Hi, Nancy, it's Judy. If someone's interested in having one of these conversations with one of our trained facilitators at CBST before the fall, let me know, jripnick@cbst.org, and I'll put my phone number in here too. You can reach out to me that way as well. Thanks.
This question about travel, your proxy is your proxy wherever you are, as long as the proxy can be reached. In terms of advanced directives, whether or not all of the things that you articulate that you would like to have happen may or may not be legal in certain jurisdictions. Hate to say it, but it's true. Or in certain hospitals, depending on who runs the hospital. So that your ability to have everything that you want to be done may or may not be possible depending on where you are. And in terms of other countries, again, your healthcare proxy, if it's clearly designated, my understanding is that the healthcare professionals wherever you are should be trying to get in touch with that person to make sure that they can speak for you. But what can actually be done in some countries, anything that you designate probably can happen. In other countries, there may be some restriction.
So I have a question that I guess refers to that in some way. So you mentioned about having a card. What Matters offers a card that you can keep in your wallet or on your person. Supposing, there was an accident and you were unconscious when they took you to the hospital. Is that something that hospitals do? Do they go through your wallet and your phone?
Contact.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, I think we need to give people 4 minutes to get to their next session. Thank you so much, Nancy. So if you're going to the everyone needs somebody, that's on the same Zoom room. But if you're going to any of the other sessions, you'll have to go into another Zoom room. So we're starting again at 12:10, about 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.